And I'm very delighted today to introduce our own Peter Walker, who has been in environmental studies and geography for a number of years now, and I can go to numbers. And of course, you're probably somewhat familiar with the breadth of Peter's scholarship, which ranges from political ecology issues in Africa to land use politics in California and in Oregon. And today he's going to talk to us about an incredibly exciting topic that we've all been following very closely in the news, and he's going to provide us that true insider view of what was really going on in Burns and its Malheur occupation. Please join me in welcoming Peter.
I want to thank, there's apparently not a functioning microphone system, so if you can't hear me in the back, just let me know. I want to thank there are a number of people, some friends, old friends from out of town and out of town, and I appreciate you taking the time. I've got a lot, and I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, so let's start. Well, let me start with a couple of caveats, which is first that I don't speak for Harney County. Harney County's had quite enough of having outsiders come and speak for them. I will, however, give you my impressions after quite a bit of observation and field work, talking to quite a few people there. Harney County is quite adamant about maintaining its voice, as you can see. And the second caveat is that that I don't speak for the Burns Paiute tribe. The community in Harney County was quite profoundly and adversely, in my opinion, affected by the occupation. The Burns Paiute probably in different ways, and really in ways that I can't speak to as a non-native person. Fortunately, we're going to have a member of the Burns Paiute Council, a friend of mine, Jarvis Kennedy, come to speak for us in this very same seminar next week. Same time, different location, the Many Nations Longhouse on the other side of the campus, near the law school. Just in case you need to know where Harney County is, the largest county in Oregon, lowest population density, right in the heart of Oregon's high desert country. It's really a very beautiful landscape. Had the great pleasure of being invited by a rancher friend who has a small plane to go up with him. I took about 1,000 photos. This is the town of Highness, to the left, the town of Burns, which basically usually just get collectively called Burns. It's about half, a little over half of the entire county of Harney County. It's about 3,000 or 4,000 people, which is about half of the population of Harney County. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background, how I almost accidentally got involved with this, which was that in early January, when the armed takeover of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge happened, it happened on a Saturday, and most of the world really didn't hear about it until Sunday morning. On Monday morning, and what I knew about it at that point was what I learned from OPB radio. I got a call from OPB radio, Think Out Loud's Think Out Loud program on Monday morning, and said, well, I think we've heard that you're an expert on this topic. Would you like to talk for our Talk Out Loud program? And I said, well, actually, what I know about this at the moment is what I've learned from OPB, so it's kind of defeats the purpose. But I realized it was actually really very much up my alley in terms of my research background. And it did happen that I had a one-term sabbatical that was starting exactly at that time. I've always said, I thank the Bundys for having chosen to have their arms. So actually, right during my sabbatical, right at the beginning of my sabbatical. And so it took me about a week to decide that I was going to drop out of what I was doing. I was working on a book proposal for a completely different project on Africa. And I dropped that project and I said, this is just way too interesting. I gotta go see what's going on. So being on sabbatical and with permission from my family. I got in my car and drove out to Harney County, to Burns. And at that point, the press had basically, the FBI, the militia, had basically taken every motel room in the entire area, including all the way up in John Day. You couldn't get a motel room anywhere in that area, with one exception, which was I discovered there was one motel, which is sort of a stretch of the word motel, where I died, which was not on Expedia or any other internet booking service. So there were a few rooms. So it's called the Silver Spur Motel. So I got there, and I stayed, and I discovered later that it was referred to locally by the Harney County, by the Burns community as the Militia Motel. I'm sorry that this display isn't particularly good, but this is a rally of people who were basically mourning the death of Lavoy Finicum, one of the occupation leaders, shortly after the arrests and the shooting of Lavoy Finicum on January 26th. That's the Silver Spur Motel, and you probably can't read the writing on this card, but it says, it's about the government's plan to implant a microchip in your brain to control your brain. And so these were the folks that I was staying with just next door through about 6 inches of wall, including a guy named Pete Santilli, who some of you are probably familiar with, sort of a spokesman for the militia patriot group that had taken over the Refuge. So inadvertently, I spent much of January and February with a front row seat to the militia activity in Burns. And sometime during my stay at the Silver Spur Motel in Burns, I sent an email to Mary Braun, Mary, from OSU Press, and I said something like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but it seems to me it's worth a book. And Mary emailed me back, I think within something like 3 hours.
Oh boy!
And the subject header of the email was yes! Exclamation. So that's how I got involved. The title of the book, which is to be completed next year, is Sagebrush Collaboration: How Harney County, Oregon Chose Cooperation Over Rebellion. I want to focus on a few things in the talk. One is the nature of the occupation itself. The media did a good job, but I think didn't really do a complete job in communicating what exactly the occupation was about, and in a sense, what kind of a threat it represented to public lands in general. I think it actually posed a much more sort of profound and existential kind of threat to public lands as a whole than I think the media really completely picked up on, and I want to emphasize that part of the story. Second focus for today's talk is the community impact. What was the impact of the occupation on the community? Third, how did the community respond? And the answer is, in short, there was a lot of resistance. There were some people who supported the ideas, but the majority of people strongly, as you see in this image, strongly rejected the occupation, wanted the Bundys to go home, and said so repeatedly. And the final focus of the talk, and this is in parentheses because it's really very much of an area where I'm still sort of thinking through what to say, is, well, what lessons do we take away from this whole experience? Okay, let me focus first on the question of the occupation. What did the occupiers represent, in a sense? And to answer that question, I think you have to start out with a little bit of history, which is go back to 2014 when Clive Bundy, the father of Ammon and Brian Bundy, had a standoff with federal authorities. Basically, Clive Bundy declared his sovereignty from the United States, declared that the Bureau of Land Management land on which he had been grazing for any number of years didn't constitutionally belong to the federal government, it belonged to him, and therefore he just unilaterally declared that he wasn't going to pay his BLM grazing fees, and didn't do so for more than 20 years, and collected fees and fines in the amount of about a little over $1 million. And in April 2014, the BLM basically said had enough, and they were under legal pressure, I believe, from environmental groups. And so the BLM attempted to round up Ammon Bundy's cows, at which point he called out the armed militia. About 300 of them showed up with guns and pointed their guns at the BLM agents who were attempting to impound Bundy's cows. And the BLM understandably backed off instead of having a massive bloodbath, which probably would have happened. So that gave the Bundy family the sense that they had won. And that's a really important point, which is that they believed, and I think they believed absolutely, they said, and I think they believed absolutely sincerely, that they had proved that if you point guns at the federal government will back down. And so, and they were on a campaign along with a number of nationwide groups. This is part, you can think of what happened at Malheur, what happened at Bunkerville, as parts of a bigger political movement, so-called land transfers movement, to basically transfer public land to state and county and ultimately private ownership. There's a lot of, and there were independent groups, not sort of loosely affiliated with the Bundys, who were very specifically, after the Bunkerville incident, were very specifically looking for an opportunity to take a hard stand, to take that fight that started in Bunkerville and reproduce it someplace else, and in a sense start a, and this is where I'm headed with this, start a nationwide revolution against federal control of land. So there were groups who were very specifically looking for an opportunity for a fight, and they got that opportunity in October 2015 when some Hardin County ranchers who had had their own sort of disputes with the federal government for many, many years, for decades. The Hammond family, who were not originally from Hardin County, but had been there since the 1960s, and pretty much since they got there, they were locked in a battle with the federal agencies that they worked with, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the BLM, including doing things like threatening the lives of Fish and Wildlife Service employees and so on. They were, in Ammon Bundy's own words, he was no angel. He acknowledged that. Despite that, the militia groups rallied around the Hammonds when there was basically a botched legal process here in Eugene, actually, by a federal judge who basically just discarded federal mandatory minimum sentencing laws and said, well, you know, if I apply the Hammonds had been convicted of arson on federal land, and according to the law, the minimum mandatory sentence was 5 years. The judge, Judge Michael Hogan here in Eugene, said that sentence would shock the conscience, and he chose to give Dwight Hammond a 3-month sentence and Steve Hammond a year and a day sentence. Well, the Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Justice said that's not acceptable. It went to the Ninth Circuit Court in San Francisco. It came back and they said, yeah, you can't just ignore these federal sentencing laws. That's the law. So the Hammonds were resentenced and had to basically report back to prison to fulfill the rest of their 5-year mandatory minimum. And that, to many people in Hardin County and in many western rural communities, was perceived as unfair. They called it double jeopardy. It doesn't technically meet the criteria for double jeopardy, but they did see it in those terms as profoundly unfair. The Bundys and other militia and land transfer groups saw that as an opportunity. That's where they were going to pick their next fight, and that's exactly what they did. So around the end of October, the beginning of November, Ammon Bundy showed up with a guy named Ryan Payne, a militia member from Montana, and had a series of meetings with the local sheriff, Dave Ward, and basically told Dave Ward that he would have to shield the Hammonds from being having to go back to prison if he was a good, constitutionally law-abiding sheriff in their view. And Dave Hammond said, Dave Ward said, no, thank you. I mean, that's not the way I read the Constitution. As I read it, I'm obligated to carry out this court order, and I'm going to do so. So the Bundys basically got nowhere with Dave Ward, despite a lot of overt threats and intimidation. I talked at length several times with Dave Ward, and he said it was very clear, and that specifically Ryan Kane, Ammon Bundy's right-hand person in a sense, said, if you don't do what we want you to do, there is going to be extreme civil unrest. We have thousands of militia members who can come to your county, and we can't control what they might do. It was very explicit, and Dave Ward felt a lot of pressure. Dave Ward told me at one point he was pretty convinced that if Ryan Kane didn't kill him, he was going to have to kill Ryan Kane. They were locked into really serious battle, and Dave Ward simply refused to go along with the plan to shield the Hammonds from going back to prison. In the meantime, several militia groups who were affiliated, but sort of loosely affiliated with the Bundys, organized a rally in downtown Burns to protest the arrest of the Hammonds, the resentencing of the Hammonds. And everybody in town, talked to a lot of people about this, and universally, everybody knew the history of the Bundys. They knew the Bundys were there. They knew about the Bunkerville incident. And everybody knew perfectly well that the Bundys weren't just going to have a peaceful rally and go home. The problem was nobody knew what they were going to do. And what they did do was right after that rally, which was otherwise peaceful, Ammon Bundy and a group of his followers, and the numbers are disputed, but it was probably as small as about a dozen people showed up at the refuge. There was nobody there. It was a weekend. Nobody was occupying the buildings. And they took over the refuge. There's Ammon Bundy, and there's a fish biologist who works at the refuge named Linda Beck. That's her office. There's Ammon Bundy's pizza and a large box of ammunition on Linda Beck's desk. And they went to pretty considerable extremes in making sure that they demonstrated that they were in control of access to the refuge. That's the entrance to the headquarters of the Wildlife Refuge. They parked a federal vehicle, which was, they were operating illegally and so on. They put on a sign for the Hammonds and so on. They put armed guards with large, military-style rifles in front of that, the truck, and made it very clear. And it's interesting, right now, of course, there's a conspiracy trial going on in Portland, and it's very frustrating to people in Hardin County, it's very frustrating to me, that there's even a question of whether there was a conspiracy. If you worked at the refuge, would you walk past that truck with the guy with the AR-15 and say, oh, I really need to do my job? Or walk up to Ammon Bundy with his desk with the ammunition on the table and so on and say, I'd really like to get back to my work. No. They made it very clear that they were in control and they had some kind of plan. And I just wanted to show off this picture because it was a cool picture because I was able to take it from there. That's the refuge. And so just a little tiny speck in the middle of there's about 30 miles of sagebrush desert and Malheur and Kearney Lakes between the refuge and anything else. And it's pretty funny if you think about it that the Bundys were basically proposing a armed insurrection, overthrow of the federal government, while standing in a frozen bird refuge 30 miles from literally anything. But that was what they intended to do. Ammon Bundy very explicitly declared that his intent was to overthrow the federal government of the United States. And I say that partly because the media, in my opinion, really didn't fully pick up on that, but it was crystal clear. And I'm going to show you a video of their presentation. This was in the small town of Crane, just outside, about 12 miles, I think, outside of Burns, where the Bundy brothers and their supporters met with local ranchers, and they pretty much just came right out and said, this is about an overthrow of the government of the United States. And here it is in their words. This is an extended excerpt. Forgive me for my poor video editing skills, but I wanted you to hear it directly from their words. And what you'll see first, this is Ryan Payne, in my view, the intellectual, to the extent you can call him that, the intellectual, military and tactical leader of the occupation. And he starts by reading the Declaration of Independence, and he basically makes an analogy between the British colonial rule and the right of the colonies to overthrow British colonial tyranny and the modern U.S. federal government, and makes the argument that what he perceives, at least as tyranny, justifies overthrowing, in fact requires for good patriots to overthrow the government of the United States.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the law of nature and of nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men. To secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness, any government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. Pretty heavy stuff. And to institute new government. They're willing to uphold unconstitutional, codes, regulations, case law, precedent, and they're willing to kill you if you violate them and you don't submit to them. They're absolutely, right? And it sounds absurd. It sounds like a hard road to take, but you don't lawfully have to have a driver's license because you have the right to travel freely. You have the right to own a vehicle, right? You have the right to own private property, and you have the right to travel wherever you want to in that private property on the common usage right of way, which is a road, a public road that you don't pay for. But an officer will pull you over, and he will ask you for your license. And if you don't produce it, then he's going to try to arrest you, or he won't just write you a ticket. That's you're driving without a license. And now tell him, well, sir, according to the Constitution, I don't have to have a license to travel. And it's not that it says you don't have to have a license. It says it doesn't say that you have to have one. Right? So, and it doesn't give the government the authority to tell you that you have to have a license. Now here's another interesting point. In a lot of states, you have the lawful right to resist arrest to the point of the use of lethal force. We mutually pledge to one another our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So if you want to be free, you have to be willing to give it all up. And the reason I think the way that we should finish off this conversation is exactly on the lines of what you brought up, which is how do we protect ourselves from all these injustices? We foresee retribution. We know that the individuals who have stepped out of the box and decided decided that they were going to stand. Hammonds, for instance, have been standing for years. They've been fighting the federal government. And they were going to fight this time, right? But when the individual is singled out, then that weight can be brought to bear. And when you stand together, you have strength in numbers, right? They said, Benjamin Franklin is quoted as saying, if we do not hang together, then surely we will all become separate. And so, one of the ways that we can hang together is by having these meetings, getting together and talking about the issues. And if you decide that it's necessary for your safety, to provide for that safety by organizing yourselves in defensive form, then you can do that.
So our goal is that these rights are going to be deeded in the county. And then you will stand and use those rights, because we're going to make it so you can claim them. And then you're going to be using those rights. You're going to start using them. So when the snow melts, you're going to decide when to put the cattle on. You're going to decide when you're going to take it off, and what you're going to do with the grass, which you're going to decide, right? And then we are here temporarily to defend you. And we have a lot more that are willing to come and defend you. And then, but eventually you've got to get unified enough yourselves that you can start defending yourself. And believe me, they want to make you believe that and afraid. That's their tool. But when even this group right here, even half this group, probably this, if you guys would stand, you'd be strong enough right there to do anything you want. You would be strong enough as just this 10 or 12 people that are right here. If you were to stand and you stood together, the federal government, you would have enough power to stop the federal government. Because natural law basically says whoever is using them has established that right. So we're taking how they're being used right now, and we're going to document that and transfer.
Most of that documentation is already done. In other words, you guys already know where your grazing are, you already know where your rights are. All we want to do is get that down and record it in the county recorder's office as part of this process.
With the defense of the people both in Hardin County and across this nation, to make sure you're not violated and abused. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It will never happen again. I can promise you. It will never happen again. The next time that this happens, or if you have an opportunity, it will be war. Okay, right now we have an opportunity to do this peacefully. You'll be an example to other counties around you that are already right on the verge, and it'll start to take effect, and it'll happen peacefully without war. And we're asking you to take advantage of this to both collectively and individually claim your rights back and use them as your own, as we and the rest of the people of this county defend. And it's really that simple. The opportunity is now. And the place is Hardin County, and you are the people. And there will never be an opportunity like this again. But you guys have all the power, like I said. Just you guys right here, if you would agree, you have all the power you have to do it.
One rancher made it in Nevada, you saw it happen.
Yeah, just one. But it comes down to having the courage. The mechanism that we're asking is to cancel your contracts, and then we work on this adjudications and so forth as a county with a unified body, and we get this thing straightened out. And then you guys will be an example of a free county,
Federal free county.
abiding by the Constitution, and being able to not have to worry about what happened to the Hammonds, not have to have the fear, not having to live that way anymore.
My name's Scott Franklin. I'm a fourth-generation rancher. And I'm going to ask you a question. Are we a nation of laws? No, we're not. So we just break laws all the time and we're okay.
We are a nation of laws, and this law is the one that's being broken. And if this law is not upheld, then we will be a nation of slaves.
Okay,
This
so
law, the supreme law of that.
please. So there's the Constitution in your hand. Okay, that's as it's written. And then there's the Constitution as you guys define it and argue it, and that's what you've been doing. But in the end, who decides what the Constitution says?
The people.
The Supreme Court. Did they decide about the Second Amendment several years ago? Yes, they did.
Remember, we were talking about judicial review?
And that's who decides is the Supreme Court. And if I'm not running around without a driver's license, I'm not going to run around very long.
So what if the Supreme Court decides something that's not constitutional?
The Supreme Court probably does, so does our president. Okay, but that Supreme Court is the one that sets the law.
This is exactly why our nation is in trouble, because he does not understand natural law.
How many acres do you guys own? How many acres does your dad own? How many deed acres?
160.
Okay, so if I'm going to break these laws and these governments want to come and put a lien on what I have and pay dearly for it, sacrifice a lot for my land, they can take it. And I own more than 160 acres. I got more skin in the game.
Okay, you're afraid, that's what you're saying.
I'm saying
You're losing your fortune.
I'm saying that I'm not going to fight an uphill battle that's not going to be won.
You're going to pass what onto your children?
I'm going to pass my land, and
It won't be your land very long.
They're going to take everything.
What do you think they're doing with the sage grouse? Let me just, if you want to get down to this, let me tell you about the sage grouse. They're attacking 3 fronts on the sage grouse, okay? You understand? Yes. Okay, what are they attacking? They're going to control federal land, okay? They're going to control state land. And what is the third? Private property. They already have plans in the making to take your private property.
What if this were to work? And show up on Saturday, will you? Either watch or decide yourself.
So what they were calling for was for the ranchers in Harney County to sign what they call cancellation agreements, something like that, which is basically renouncing their obligations to BLM, saying we're no longer going to pay BLM or U.S. Forest Service or whatever fees, and we're not going to abide by regulations and so on. And as you saw, a lot of the ranchers in Harney County were pretty skeptical of that invitation. And in fact, the Bundys had a signing ceremony at the Refuge where they were calling on Harney County ranchers to come and renounce their grazing contracts. They got precisely 0 Harney County ranchers to come. They got exactly 1 rancher from New Mexico to come and signed. That's a guy named Adrian Sewell. He came, he signed his agreement to pledge to break his BLM contract. Shortly after the occupation ended, he renewed his BLM contract and was in good standing with the U.S. Forest Service. He renewed his contract and was in good standing. So they got precisely 0 traction on that argument. And of course, shortly, just a few days after their signing ceremony to break the grazing leases, the arrests took place. LaVoy Finicum was shot and killed. Now, let me ask you, think about what would have happened had the people in Harney County gone along with the proposals that the Bundys were offering. Well, first of all, it was very clear what they were inviting people to do. And that's when Ammon Bundy was standing there saying, if just you, these 10 people around me, stand against the federal government, you'll have all the power that it takes to block the federal government. What he was talking about was basically, he was talking in other venues, he talked very openly about force of arms. He was saying, we'll use our weapons to fight the federal government, the federal government will back off. And in a sense, basically overthrowing the authority of the federal government through the tearing up of the grazing contracts. And the Bundys made it very clear that their intent, and the intent of the allied militia groups, was to defend any Harney County ranchers who went along with that plan through the use of arms. They made no bones about it. It was very clear what they were offering. And basically, I think what's important and what the media didn't completely pick up on was the Hammonds and the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge were really just, in Ammon Bundy's own words, the point of the spear. This was the beginning of a much, in his view, the beginning of a much bigger political movement. And Harney County, he picked Harney County to be the point of the spear and all of that. And as you heard Ammon Bundy talk about in the video, he said, you'll be an example of a federal free county that will set an example for other communities that are right on the edge. He saw this very much as the beginning of a regional, if not national, political rebellion. I want to talk about community impact. First of all, more of me showing off my photos on the plane. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. I've really fallen in love with the place. One of the things that's so striking is that I've gone through now, I went through an entire set of tires, and I'm working on a second set of tires in my car. The distances between anything there are absolutely enormous. And that's actually not an unimportant fact to think about when you think about the nature of community there. People feel very isolated, and what that means is that they're extremely dependent on their neighbors. And maintaining good relationships with their neighbors is essential because, for example, if there was a medical emergency, a criminal act or something going on, and you called for an ambulance or you called for the sheriff's department, it could easily be an hour or as much as 2 hours before anybody could get there. Any emergency services could get there. So people are very aware of the fact that they're extremely dependent on each other. And in addition to that, it's a 2-hour drive from Bend, it's about a 3-hour drive to Boise, it's about a 5 or 6 hour drive to Portland. They feel very separated out from the rest of Oregon, frankly. And they see themselves as, in a sense, standing alone. I felt that too. Driving to Harney County in the winter, even on Highway 20, which is the main highway between Bend and Burns, in the winter it can be very nearly impossible to drive on that road at times. People feel very isolated in this community, and the consequence is that they feel very dedicated to maintaining good community relations. It's a practical need for them to do that. And people get together on a regular basis. It's one of the most civically active communities I've ever experienced, probably the most civically active. Everybody knows everybody. I've said it's kind of like the feeling of a big high school. Everybody either knows everybody or knows of everybody else in the county. And you meet people like there's Dave Ward, the sheriff, there's Craig LaFollette, the mayor, at all these events and so on. You get to know your community government, you get to know your neighbors, you recreate with them, you share meals with them and so on. Now, let me say that has translated into some very important assets for the community with respect to land use management. Which is that Harney County is, in a sense, literally the poster child for federal collaborative efforts to manage land. For example, this is a webpage from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. When last fall, just about a year ago today, the Fish and Wildlife Service declared that it would not list the sage grouse as an endangered species, and a big part of the reason for that non-listing choice was because there were a series of collaborative agreements that had been established at the community level in places like Harney County, and Harney County literally became Harney County's model of collaborative land use management. You're working out ways where you can provide for the needs of ranchers while maintaining habitat for the sage grouse. That model, pioneered in Harney County, was used by dozens of communities outside of the area. And so if you go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's webpage, to this day, I believe, they have a section called Success Stories, and Harney County is there. These are several well-known Harney County ranchers. Steve Grasty, the county judge, and so on are all there. Harney County has, in a sense, leveraged that kind of close-knit feeling of community into some very practical benefits in terms of collaborative management. But then along come these radical, revolutionary militia groups who really started showing up in November and December 2015, before the Refuge was occupied, because they had heard about the Hammonds, and they had made this decision to use the Hammonds as a tool to promote their cause. And so they started occupying the community well before the Refuge was occupied. That's a truck belonging to John Ritzheimer, which has a very clear statement of his philosophy on the back of the truck. There are people walking around in public. It's a picture I took. I didn't take very many pictures of people with guns. It's actually fairly intimidating to take pictures of people with guns. But you saw them all over the place, especially at the Silver Spur Motel. And it was very frightening. And the big part of the problem with this was that, a video clip, shorter video clip, that gives you a sense of the nature of that fear. Stories that echoed that high schoolers' sentiments. I've talked to moms who said that, they had militia members with their guns approach them in places like the Safeway, the Rite Aid, the food store, and ask them very aggressively, what is your opinion about the Hammonds? And people didn't know what the point of that was, and they felt very scared about it. And I had one mom who said, we weren't sure what they were going to do. We thought maybe they were taking notes of who was with them and who was against them, and then when they did whatever it was that everybody knew that they were going to do, they would round up the people who didn't support the Hammonds and put them into some kind of concentration camp or something. I mean, that might sound wild, but you have to put yourself in their place and ask, if people were coming up to you in the grocery store with weapons and asking you that question, you would have to ask why were they doing that? Ashley's plea to the militia was not heard by the militia. They showed up at another community the next week with their arms in the high school gym. I was there. And they literally walked, I'll show you a video clip again of this. They walked into the high school gym with their guns, with maybe 300 citizens present. They tactically positioned themselves around the different corners of the gym with their weapons. And then the community meeting tried to go forward. It was one of the most surreal scenes I've ever seen. People were scared to death. I mean, they were really, really scared. But what's very interesting, I'll show you a video clip of this, was people did not back down to the Bundys at all. I'll show you an example of But I wanted to emphasize that this sense of fear in the community has not gone away. There was a site at the place where LaVoy Finicum was killed and the arrests of the Bundys took place, which is still kind of like a shrine for the Bundys. And it still attracts militia who come in and take pictures of it and camp there. The Malheur National Wildlife Refuge headquarters is still closed. The people who work there tell me on a regular basis they get militia tourists who come and take selfies of themselves in front of sort of the militia Alamo. This is still going on, right? And people in the community are feeling quite frustrated right now with the trial in Portland because, in their view, the conspiracy charge. Sorry.
It was just dropped.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to go as fast as I can. The conspiracy charges against the Bundys simply don't account for what happened in Burns. People are very frustrated about that. Let me talk quickly about community resistance. People obviously were very clear about their own resistance to the Bundys. Now, this was not universal. There were people in the community who supported the ideas of the Bundys, but those people were a minority. The majority of the community made their opinions known in a number of ways, small and large, and I do want to give you one more video.
Agreements and refused to answer them. I feel like there's no communication there. And also, I'm flying a lot of medical air flights because I'll stand by it. We're asked
to break the unified message from those who are with me and you folks here continues to be this. Go home. Please leave our community.
We need to recognize what's really going on down at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. For 3 weeks now, it has been an active crime.
all wildlife refuge.
In our community.
And instead of invading all wildlife refuge and then daring to come here in our public school while our children are practicing their sports, you should just go home and hold somebody catches you on the way and you go to jail and you talk to me. Because this is our home. We love it or we wouldn't be here. And we just want you to give it back to us. Let us take control now. You know, everybody
Government does not negotiate with what they consider terrorists. And I don't mean anything bad about that, Mr. Bundy. I appreciate you coming. But really, I can't go home. But this community is what I work for. Mr. Bundy, be very clear. I'm happy to meet you. Any place outside my county, it is time for you to go home.
They didn't. They didn't go home. But the community continued to demonstrate their support for law enforcement. Their support for law enforcement. They rallied in front of the courthouse. There was a threat by the militia to assassinate the judge, Steve Grasty. The community literally stood on the steps in front of the door of the courthouse and prevented the militia from entering the courthouse. As you saw in that video clip, Scott Franklin, a friend of mine now, stood up to Bundy and just said, "Your theory is, a crock," and just said it right to his face. this community was not intimidated. They were fearful, but they were not bowing down. For a minute. Oh, sorry, I do want to give you one more. I know we're short on time. This is worth it.
My name is Georgia Marshall. I've lived here 54 years. My great-grandfather was Ed Oliver. You know who that is, you know the French connection. I am a rancher. I have a BLM permit, several allotments. I have a refuge permit. I have gone through numerous managers and range cons, both on the BLM and on the refuge. I have seen the progress that we have made in this community compared to the shit we went through years ago when you could not stand and talk to a manager, when you could not stand and talk to a range con. But now, we have been making some progress. Granted, it's not a lot of progress, but it's coming. And we have an organization here that stands up for us across the board. It is called the High Desert Partnership. And you may not know a lot about it, but it's working damn hard for all of us. It takes the time to listen across the board to what we all have to say as a community, as environmentalists, as agencies, as business owners, as educators. We are the poster child of the ranching community, of the environmental community, of the government community when they see what has happened here in Harney County. We have a CCP plan that was done just a couple of years ago that is unprecedented across the United States on refuges. Have we ever had anybody come and put together a refuge plan in this goddamn nation? Hell no, we haven't! But it happened here, and it happened in Harney County. And you know why? Because we love this county. Because we care about it, and we care about how it works for us. We have an initiative to work on the timber initiative in Grant and Harney County to harvest the small diameter timber. It's not the best thing, but it's better than what it was. It is getting people in the woods a little bit. At least we're getting some progress there. It starts small, but it's better than how it was. Let's not destroy what we are doing because we think we have to make a stand for everything that's happened in the goddamn past. This is our time now. It is not what we did 100 years ago or 60 years ago or 30 years ago. It's our moment right now. We don't know our future, but I'll tell you what, it's better than what we had. So let's try to keep going. Let's not get caught up like I'm pissed as hell right now. And my boots are shaking, but I'm proud to be a rancher, and I'm not going to let some other people see my face. I am me.
I don't think the Bundys really knew who they were dealing with. George Marshall represents a viewpoint, I'll just, for sure, for the sake of time, I'm just going to say, by various recent election results, about 70 to 80% of the community basically support continuing to work collaboratively, not attempting to overthrow the government and these kinds of things. Okay. Finally, I want to say, what can we take away from this? Well, for one thing, this is not an isolated incident. There's a much broader land transfers movement. The Sagebrush Rebellion, of course, has been around for generations, decades at least. And the question arises that I think we come back to, in a sense, is that if we're going to have federal public land, then the question is, how can it be managed equitably and sustainably? And even though the Bundys had completely the wrong answer, I think the issues are nevertheless real. And the answer that's been found in Harney County is through collaborative processes. And this is one of my favorite quotes of all of my field work so far. George's husband, Gary Marshall, told me collaboration is what inoculated us from the Bundy virus. Fifth generation rancher, someone who knows the land, who knows all the federal agencies, and has figured out how to work with them constructively. There are continuing divisions within the community. There are people who are in a sense radicalized by having been around the Bundys. There are people who are, this is at the Harney County Fair, people handing out pocket constitutions. They're there. I think to some extent this has endangered the success of the community and collaboration. But everybody says, everybody in Harney County, I've heard this many times, it's a resilient county. Mary, I have to say, one of your reviewers said that my point about resilience was kind of hokey, we've been there and done that, but that's the same language that they use in that county. They say, we are a resilient county, we're going to come back stronger than ever. Right? And with that, I'm going to give the last, and the notion of collaboration and community is very explicitly the ideas, the tools with which the community rejected the revolutionary ideologies of the Bundy bunch. And with that, I'm going to give the very last word to a friend of mine in Harney County, although I'm not sure that GTFO is technically a word. There you go. I know we're technically out of time. If people need to fill, that's great. Otherwise, I'd be happy to answer some questions. Yeah.
It seems like the legal charges against the people are kind of minimal compared to what they actually do.
Absolutely.
What was the question?
The question is, are the legal charges minimal compared to what the Bundy group and the militia did? That's absolutely the way people in Harney County feel, at least in my observation. There were many charges that I believe could have been brought against the Bundys. For example, you saw the video of the scene in the high school gym. It was 100% illegal to bring arms, and they were heavily armed. I could see them. There were some of them sitting right in front of me, and the bleacher right below me. Heavily armed, openly heavily armed. It's completely illegal. Every man, woman, and child in that room was in serious jeopardy. There were armed sheriffs, there were armed FBI agents in the room. Anything could have triggered a firefight with potentially catastrophic effects. And that's not even remotely in the federal charges that are being brought. And I was there. I was in danger too. I feel offended that the federal government did not bring charges on the harassment charges. Federal employees in Burns were specifically stalked. The sheriff's wife's car had her tires slashed. I mean, people were openly intimidated. None of that is in the federal charges.
Do you know why?
Yeah, well, the federal prosecutors don't share their tactical decision-making with me, unfortunately. But a lot of people have speculated simply that it's easier to bring charges on conspiracy. That's simply an easier charge to prove. What happened at the Refuge as conspiracy, it was relatively easy to prove. And what's shocking to me is now it's beginning to look like even the conspiracy charges at the Refuge are looking shaky. And what's appalling is that anybody who was there, like I was, and I saw the Bundys and their followers literally, sitting on the desks and people on their AR-15s and so on. How is that not impeding federal employees from doing their job? If even the conspiracy charge to prevent federal employees from doing their job can't be upheld in court, a lot of people are going to be very disappointed and frustrated by that. And I think it'll be a real blow, frankly, to the credibility of the federal government. And the Bundys will use that as an opportunity to say, you see, we won. Again, just like Bunkerville.
Peter,
Sorry.
multiple news organizations are reporting that they all got off.
They've been acquitted.
That's fair to say.
They dropped all of it
30 minutes ago.
against everyone while you were talking. What?
There are going to be some really
How you're
deeply
pissed. What?
frustrated people in Harney County tonight.
Yeah.
Some of us here too.
Yeah.
We went through that. We went through that together.
I'm so sorry.
In a way, for dramatic effect, sort of a good bad way on the presentation, I guess. Any other questions? Thank you for that.
Well, I was going to ask about the delay between the takeover and what appeared to be a long delay in actually addressing, bringing charges and so forth. There was a considerable amount of time where it seemed to me that people in Harney County might have felt pretty alone, that the federal government seemed to be taking a lot of time before they dealt with the situation. Can you reflect on that in terms of what was going on in the town for those several weeks? Did they feel like the federal government wasn't paying attention to them?
Yeah. Yes, they did. Let me get you the tactical decision by probably Ryan Payne, I would guess. The tactical decision was nobody knew. They thought the Bundys might take over the militia, etc., might take over the OM office in town. Some people thought they would take over the whole town. Not everybody, not hardly anybody. The Refuge manager, Chad Carges, was aware that Ryan Payne had cased the Refuge, but really nobody anticipated them taking over the Refuge. Nobody knew for sure, and part of the reason was, why would you take over if, in a sense, you want a standoff with the federal government? Why would you take over a place that's out in the middle of a frozen, empty space? Because what it enabled the federal government to do was to simply say, fine, they can't hurt anything out there except for some buildings, maybe. So let them just stay there until they make a mistake. And they made a phenomenally bad mistake when they put all of their leaders into 2 vehicles on a narrow, winding canyon road to John Day, and then enabled the FBI to just scoop them all up at once, and OSP, Oregon State Police, to scoop them all up at once. Dave Ward said to me very specifically that they were waiting for those guys to make a mistake, and the concern was that there was a bunch of them. It was somewhat decentralized leadership, and there were a bunch of them who, if you had, for example, the incident in the Burns High School gym, they walked in with their arms, they walked out, they got in their vehicles, and they drove away. A lot of people, including me, wondered, sort of like GTFO, well, WTF? Why did they not get arrested then on the way back? And the answer was because LaVoy Finnegan didn't go to that event. He was back at the Refuge. And the concern was, by that point, there were maybe 50 people at the Refuge. And LaVoy Finnegan could have easily taken over the role of the leader. Without any of their leaders present on January 26th, I think what the FBI was gambling was that once they arrested all of the leaders, that the followers would just scatter, and that's exactly what they did. So yeah, it was a long, difficult waiting process, but I think the FBI in the end made the right choice, in my opinion. And I got called by the FBI several times because they knew everybody who went in and out of there. They had cameras, they took pictures of your license plates. They called me several times and asked me what I knew, and I didn't really know anything particular that they didn't know. But the second time the FBI called me and said, "What are you guys waiting for?" I was really frustrated too, the whole community was, but I think they did make the right choice. Yeah, so, Pat.
I just wanted to comment that I think understanding how rural communities respond to these issues is really critical. And there's going to be an interesting judgment coming up with the election on November 8th in Grant County, Oregon, which is the county immediately to the north. And their sheriff was a strong supporter of the militia. He is up for re-election, and he has a fairly strong opponent. That is an election to watch. Will Glenn Palmer, the constitutional sheriff, be re-elected in Grant County, or will Todd McKinley, his opponent, be re-elected? It's going to be taking the pulse of another, county that has all the motivations that Army does, and could easily go one way or the other.
Yeah, that's right. And in Harney County, Dave Ward is also up for re-election on November 8th, and he does have a explicitly pro-militia, pro-Bundy component, and so there's going to be another test.
Is this just a case of the Bundys not doing their geography homework?
Yes.
Could they have picked any number of other communities in the Panhandle of Idaho or something where they would have gotten more traction and had a whole different outcome?
Yes, I absolutely agree. Right from the beginning, I said they picked the wrong county, because Harney County has such a strong record of collaborative land use management. I won't bore you with details, but the Steens Mountain Agreement, the Malheur Comprehensive Conservation Plan, the Sage Grouse Agreement, these are just a few examples. Harney County has really been a leader in collaborative land use management. In other words, ways of dealing with the very kinds of tensions that the Bundys were talking about, but dealing with them in a collaborative approach, talking with people at the table and so on. I don't think the Bundys had a clue what kind of community they were in. And I think it's not insignificant, by the way, I mentioned this for a reason. The Hammonds were not from Harney County. And they always had a big bone to pick with the federal government from the day they arrived. They did not have the same kind of community collaborative ethic that the rest of the community did. And I think what happened was Susie Hammond, the wife of Dwight Hammond, called up Clive Bundy or Ammon Bundy, I'm not sure which, and said they didn't want to go back to prison. And Susie thought that, well, Bunkerville worked, so let's call the Bundys and see if they'll help us. And they had these conversations between the Bundys and the Hammonds. And I think the Bundys made the huge mistake of assuming that the Hammonds represented most of the county, and they simply didn't. They felt that the radical, angry, confrontational view that the Hammonds approach with the federal government that the Hammonds had taken represented the whole county. It simply didn't.
I think the $1 million question is, could that revolution have gotten off the ground in a different place?
Yes. Yes, people in Harney County and people have questioned, and I don't think there's a clear answer to this, whether if they had gone instead to Grant County, where they did have a sympathetic sheriff, not necessarily a sympathetic community, but there was a sympathetic sheriff, could the revolution have gotten more traction? Had they gone to almost anywhere in southern Idaho, they probably could have gotten more traction. I mean, people are aware of that. So yeah, geography matters, doing your geography matters. Yes.
The other part that doesn't quite add up for me is at what point did it become a revolution? Because they put
so much pressure on the sheriff to protect him. If they had succeeded in that, then they wouldn't have actually had the need for a takeover, right? If they had succeeded. So if they weren't starting out with the impression of creating a takeover.
No, I mean, it would have been a different form, but I think essentially what it would have been doing was defying federal authority. I don't think they particularly cared exactly what form of their revolution took. I don't think they thought about the tactical implications. Their initial intent was to get Dave Ward, the sheriff of Kearney County, to shield the Hammonds from federal arrest. Had they done that, that would have forced federal authorities and the FBI to have some sort of showdown with Dave Ward. And that would have been wonderful from the Bundy's perspective. Yeah.
This is kind of a tricky sort of question, but I've heard about it, and I don't know if you can clarify. I understand that that actually part of what they occupied was private property, because the buildings or some part of it actually belonged to a foundation.
No, that's the field station.
Oh.
No, there's a place called Malheur Field Station, which is just a mile or two away from the Refuge headquarters. I think that's what you're talking about. The Refuge headquarters that they took over, that's definitely Federal Fish and Wildlife Service property.
And they left the field station alone?
No, they use the dining tables as for target practice.
Okay, so that's what I heard, because apparently there's a whole civil set of cases that can be brought because that's part of it, which they probably didn't realize.
I'm actually. Yeah.
I'm curious about the role of religion to have taken here, because sorry. I mean, I just like to hear your take on that with the Mormon undertaking there. Ammon brought that up in the trial of divine revelation of this being kind of a takeover, and how the community reacted to that, how the other militia leaders, how did that all go into the mix?
Okay, here's what I can say. I've thought a lot about that question, and it's come up a lot. There are two things I think I can say, and they're a little bit at odds with each other. One is that I don't think it's right to say this was a Mormon revolution. Ryan Payne, who I still consider to have been the architect of the whole takeover of the Malheur Refuge, and as you saw and talked about, he was the one who went to Dave Ward's office and started issuing threats and bringing in thousands of militia and so on. Ryan Payne was not Mormon. The Hammonds were not Mormon. Most of the sort of lower level, not the leadership, but the lower level who were occupying the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge were not Mormon. Okay, so I don't think you can say that this was a Mormon thing. However, it's obviously clear, and when you listened to Bundy himself, it was obviously clear that he was actually, in some cases, actually speaking from, what's the Book of Covenants, I think it's called, something like that. Yeah, he was speaking in language that was literally taken from Mormon scripture. So for him, was it largely motivated by his own religious beliefs? Absolutely. Could it, or would it have happened with someone who was not Mormon? I think, yeah. The militia movement, the patriot, I will always use quotation marks around the word patriot, the so-called patriot movement in quotation marks, is not by and large Mormon. So, is there a Mormon element of this story? Absolutely. Is it a Mormon thing? No, I don't think so. Oh, sorry, yes.
So the poor folks of the county who were either physically confronted or intimidated by the whole process over those several weeks, have they decided either on a county level or whatever to not pursue any kind of either civil or criminal action against the people?
No comment. I've actually put that question to people who have, in a sense, standing to do that, and their answer, in effect, was no comment. So what I can say is I would not be surprised if that happened. I think that there is actionable civil remedies that will potentially be available. I don't know whether they will be used or not. To give you one example, I was at the Refuge twice, and I personally saw environmentalist counter-protesters assaulted by some of the militia groups. And specifically, it's a group called the Center for Biological Diversity. And they have quite a legal staff at their disposal. And the federal prosecutors declined to bring criminal charges, and I know that Center for Biological Diversity is considering civil charges, yeah.
I know there was that rancher got all his fences cut and other things that happened, I mean.
Yeah, there are many potential civil cases to be available here. Yes?